All right, so we actually have early vote numbers from Pennsylvania and Michigan. So many of our key states that we have are starting to show early vote numbers. And so far, the numbers look really good for Democrats in Pennsylvania. And I know there's going to be somebody in the comments say Democrats always do well in early voting. Well, it always depends on the state. It always depends on the year. And in this situation, we're going to look at the county level instead of the whole state and see what's going on. So we're going to do that today. We're going to look at a few nowcast models for a few of the states as well, talk about how significant some of them are, and then explain some of the nowcast models so you can get an idea of how the numbers such as the 100% chance of winning in Minnesota for the Democrats, how that number comes about. So let's go ahead and delve first into the early vote numbers in Pennsylvania. All right, so if we look at the early votes in Pennsylvania, so we have 1% turnout as of right now. We can see Democrats have cast 72.9% of the ballots in the state. The Republicans have only cast 19.4% of the ballots, with the others and non-party affiliates, they have only cast 7.8% of the ballots. Now, where we can really see this trend happening is at the county level. Now, if we look at Montgomery County, one of the key ones that everyone talks about when it comes to the Democrats winning the state of Pennsylvania, you can see 49% of registered voters in Montgomery County are Democrats. But as of right now, their composition of the early vote is 68%, a 19% increase. That is huge. The Republicans and the independents are down. So now if we go to Dauphin County, which is where Harrisburg is located, you can see that 44% of the registered voters are Democrats, but right now they make up 64% of the electorate, compared to the 28% for Republicans and the 8% for independents. Now, if you go over to Chester County, another key county for the Democrats, you can see Democrats just slightly have a voter registration advantage at 41%, but as of this moment, they comprise of 59% of the voter turnout in that county. The Republicans are down significantly at 27%, considering they're 40% of the electorate. And over in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, we can see the same thing. Democrats are a little bit higher at 56% of registered voters, but right now they comprise of 74% of the electorate, with the Republicans, who are usually 28% of the electorate, they are turning out right now at 19%, so a significant drop for the Republicans. Now, the reason I picked these specific counties and maybe not Bucks County and others is because we just have a little bit more votes out of these counties compared to Bucks. Hopefully over the next few days, we're going to have it a little bit more uniformed when it comes to actual votes throughout the state of Pennsylvania and get a better handle on what's going to happen. But the question is how much does this have an impact? Well, let's go ahead and first look at some of the other states, see how many early votes they have in right now, see what the turnout rates are as well, and see where this election might be going. So if we look at some of the turnouts right now, we can see that Virginia is pretty high at 7.6%, with nearly 500,000 votes being cast already. Now, some of you who might have seen my earlier videos might have noticed that I had Virginia at like a 13% turnout rate. I actually had the wrong number in my spreadsheet, so now it has been adjusted. This is actually the number that is the turnout rate. Let's continue. So if we see in Michigan, which I mentioned, we are just starting to get numbers there. We have 154,669, and that's 1.8% of turnout in that state. Now, Georgia, I just want to put this on there so you can see Georgia is actually starting to record some people voting, but that's still at 0%, still a pretty minute number. Now, if we go over to Wisconsin, we see Wisconsin is at a 3.7% turnout with a little bit over 130,000. Minnesota, a little over 100,000 at a 2.9% turnout. And Texas, again, same with Georgia. I wanted to show you that some votes are actually starting to come in from Texas, but we are at 0.0%. We're talking about a state with 18 million registered voters. We're not going to glean anything out of 5,000 of them. So let's go ahead and look at two more states as far as turnout, because we have a partisan breakdown, Florida and North Carolina. So here's what we got for Florida right now. We have the Democrats leading with 41.3% of the turnout right now, with Republicans at 38.4%. and the NPAs and others at 20.3%. Of course, this is only a 1.13% turnout rate, and we should expect more. And a lot of big counties like Broward County have not really put any votes into the machines yet. So we really have no idea where the state of Florida truly is at this moment. Now, when we go to North Carolina, we see we only have a 0.17% turnout. Now, vote by mail isn't that big in North Carolina, but the early in-person voting is huge. So that's where we'll see most of the numbers. We see Democrats are right now 39.5% of the electorate, whereas Republicans are at 24%, and the others, independents and so on, are at 36.5%. But again, vote by mail numbers are a bad indicator in North Carolina, but I just wanted to show you the numbers so that you have them. So do these early results really mean anything? Like, how much are they going to have an impact on the overall vote? Well, let's go ahead and look at the 2022 results and see how many people actually voted early, voted by mail, and how much that we know of that happened before Election Day to get an idea if we can really glean anything from these numbers as far as a possible overall number in each state. So let's go ahead and look at those statistics. All right, so as you can see here, of those who voted before Election Day, 80% of the voters in Wisconsin in 2022 voted before Election Day. Texas was also high at 68% and Florida at 65%. Now we go over to Georgia. We have a 64%. And again, a lot more of this will be in-person voting. Same thing with North Carolina at 58%. And Michigan at 50%. Now, when we get to these other states, the composition is much, much lower. Virginia at 36%, Minnesota at 27%, and Pennsylvania at 23%. So even though we are getting some numbers from Pennsylvania right now, it might not be the best indicator of what will happen overall, because a lot of the vote in Pennsylvania is going to happen on Election Day. So I know a lot of you who come to this channel are not subscribed yet, and I thank you very much for watching the videos, but we're trying to get to that 20,000 subscriber mark before Election Day. So if you could please subscribe to the channel if you like the content that I have. Just hit the little bell if you want to be notified about it. That would be great. Also, if you'd like to help support the channel financially, please go ahead, become a member. You can do a chat down below, super chat or whatever. It would be great to have your help and support. So let's go ahead and go on to the next thing. Now with that, let's go over some of the nowcast models that we have here on Voting Trend. Now, I'm only going to show you a few models just due to the fact that we don't have a lot of data for some of the models to get a real clear idea of what's happening in the state. So what I've been doing with the models is I've been trying to determine if the models represent the geography that we expect. So let me give you an example in Florida. Right now in Florida, Palm Beach County is 21% of the overall vote in the state right now. The votes have been cast, but in a normal election, they're only about 7%. So in this situation, Palm Beach County is significantly more part of the electorate than it actually should be. So once those numbers start actually looking more and more like the actual population distribution that we expect, then I'm going to start bringing those out to you and showing you those. So let me go ahead and show you how I do that. So basically, I'm just doing a regression model of the 2020 composition of the vote by county, how much of the vote they comprised of overall, and comparing that to the votes that have come in now to get an idea of if the model is even good geographically. So let me go to those numbers and show you the differences. Now, the thing to remember here is that the R squared number, where you see R2 there, a 1 is a perfect correlation, okay? A perfect relationship. And the higher we get to that, the more geographically accurate these models are going to be. So if we look at Wisconsin right now, we do have an R squared of 979, which with 3.7% of the turnout right now is a pretty good indicator that we can really look at that model. The Minnesota model is at 963. So at 2.9% turnout, I think this is a good model that we can actually look at as well. When it comes to North Carolina, that model looks good right now, but it's only with 2% or 0.2, percent of the vote. And that actually causes a problem because yes, the population distribution might be good, but the party totals within those counties might not be. So let's say you have a small county and they only have 15 votes in, and it's an overwhelming Republican county, but 12 of those votes are registered Democrats, right? So we just don't have enough information right now for North Carolina to look at that model. Now, if we go look at Virginia, this R square number is a little bit lower than I want, but it does have 7.6% when it comes to the turnout rate. Now, I say it's pretty low, but most of you who actually deal in statistics probably think of 0.945 as extremely high. Well, when we're looking at distribution of population and having very, very little change, we need this number to be as close to 1 as possible. And when we start getting below 0.95, there seems to be a tiny bit of variance that becomes a little concerning. So when we look at Michigan, even though we have 1.8%, the model's at 0.887, so we're not going to look at that yet. Georgia, as I mentioned previously with North Carolina, just don't have enough of the vote in there, even though the number is higher. But again, not even near the 96 or 97 that we want to see. So if we look at the least accurate ones, we have Florida right now at 0.290, which is horrible. As I mentioned with Palm Beach County, that's the reason why. When we look at Pennsylvania right now, we're at 0.267 at 1%. Again, it's the same problem that Florida has. And when it comes to Texas, Texas is just not accurate at all, but we hardly have any votes there at all. So other models that we're going to look at when it comes to trying to predict what might happen, we're going to look at the Minnesota model, the Wisconsin model, and the Virginia model, because they're the ones that seem to have the higher numbers and a so far decent turnout rate that hopefully these trends will continue. So let's go ahead and start with the Virginia model. So if we go ahead and look at Virginia, we can see we have a 7.6% turnout, and the chances of Kamala Harris winning the state are at 61%. Now, a lot of you might say that seems low. Well, that seems low because there are a lot of Republican counties who reported early and were able to just jump up that number for the Republicans. But now that number is getting chipped away more and more and more, and this gap is starting to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So we should expect some more gaps happening soon. But just those early counties that were strongly Republican, they are impacting right now, but now they're starting to fade away. And it might just take a few days for them to be just totally negated. Now, if we look at a Wisconsin nowcast model, we see at 3.7%. And again, this is of the vote that has been submitted to this point. Kamala Harris would have an 84% chance of winning the state. Now, as we looked at geographical distribution on that other graphic, you notice that this was the most geographically representative model of them all, which makes it really, really good. This makes me feel a lot more confident in Wisconsin. Of course, as that turnout goes up, these numbers are going to change. You're going to probably get much, much, much closer. But with 3.7%, we do see Kamala Harris doing quite well. And this is going to be an important number too, because with 80% of Wisconsin probably going to be voting before Election Day, we might have a good indication right off the bat who's going to actually win the state of Wisconsin. And then that could bleed over into other states like Michigan as well. So we finally look at Minnesota with 2.9%. As I mentioned, Kamala Harris, as of this point, of the votes that have been submitted right now, has a 100% chance of winning the state. Donald Trump would not win the state at all with the 2.9% that are in right now. Again, this is well represented when it comes to geographical distribution. And as the turnout goes up more and more, this number will probably go down. But the fact that it's at this high of a rate right now is pretty good for the Democrats. So how can we say there's a 100% chance that Kamala Harris is going to win Minnesota, but then there's an 84% chance that she wins Wisconsin, but the chances are even less in Virginia, which Virginia seems like it's going to be more of a state that's going to possibly go Democratic. Now, let me go ahead and explain this model, because it's based off of votes that aren't registered by party, just pure voter registration numbers without party affiliation. Let me go ahead and explain this average vote and this average vote model and how it works, so you can kind of get an idea where these numbers come from and how I come to them. So let's go ahead and delve into what these models do. So we go ahead and look at step one. We can see step one is to take the average Democratic vote for each county over the last 4 election cycles. So let's say we have 2 presidential races and 2 gubernatorial races. For example, we have a hypothetical county that has about a 48% average Democratic vote in a county. So this is what we expect the Democrats to do, on average. Now, the second step is to find the standard deviation of the Democratic vote for those same 4 election cycles in each county. So let's say we go ahead and determine the standard deviation, and that comes out to 2.4%. Now our step 3 is to get a 95% confidence interval. We add 2 standard deviations to the average for the best Democratic scenario and subtract 2 for the worst. So let's go ahead and look at these numbers here. So we can see our best case scenario. We can see 48.8%. That was our average that we had earlier. Now we have the standard deviation of 2.4. We times that by 2, which would be 4.8. And we just simply add that to the number. So that means that in this county, the Democrats would get, at best, 53.6% of the vote. Now, when we do the worst case scenario, we do the same thing, but instead of adding the number to the average, we subtract it from the average. So you can see here, we're saying that the worst that the Democrat can do is 44%. So basically what we're saying is we can expect the Democratic vote, based on all previous results, to fall within this range with 95% confidence. So this is where the nowcasting part comes in. Before we were just looking at the history of elections, but now let's go ahead and look at the nowcast, which is take the current votes that have been cast in a county, and that would be the votes right now, and apply the best and worst case scenarios for each of those counties. So let's take this example county that we've been working with. Let's say so far they have 4,000 votes that have been submitted. Now, to figure out the best case and worst case scenarios, we just take those numbers that we had previously and times them by our number. So for example, if we take 53% of 4,000, that is 2,144 Democratic votes. This is the best that the Democrats would do based off of the previous statistics we had. And then the worst case scenario, we times that 4,000 by 44%, which was our worst scenario. And we can see that the Democrats have 1,760. So again, using previous election results, we're saying with 95% confidence that this county, of the votes that have been submitted so far, would go for the Democrats between 1,760 and 2,144 votes. Now, step 5 is where we just kind of add everything together, right? So we add the best case scenarios for the Democrats and the worst case scenarios for the Democrats, and then come up with our numbers. So we add all those totals for the best and worst case scenarios throughout the state, and here are the current numbers for Minnesota, and you will see now why Minnesota is at 100%. So if we look at the best case scenario for Democrats, with the votes that they have in right now, Democrats would get 60.8% of the vote. Now, if we look at the worst case scenario, you can see that Democrats would get 52.4% of the vote. So you can see in this situation that both the best and worst case scenario, the Democrats are over 50% of the vote. Now, I want to clarify, this is major party votes, doesn't include third party and all that, so they can win the plurality or whatever. But you can see in both of these models, they are above 50%. So if you're above 50%, if you're the Democrats in your worst model, then that means, according to the model that we have right now, you can't lose the state because both your best and worst case scenarios are all over 50%. This is the reason why we have the number for Minnesota being at 100% right now. Okay, let's go ahead and look at some more states. So you can see why Wisconsin is a little bit different, because if we look at the best case scenario for Wisconsin, we see it's at 55.1% for the Democrats. But if we look at the worst case scenario, it's at 49.1%. So we can see in this worst case scenario, the Democrats are actually below 50%. This is the reason why we do not have a 100% number like we do in Minnesota. Now let's go ahead and look at step 6, which is to take the best case scenarios for both parties and subtract 50% from that total. We subtract 50% because we are determining major party vote, as I already mentioned. This would indicate the majority of the major party vote, but could be a plurality of the overall vote. And that's just what I was talking about a little bit earlier. So let's go ahead and look at Virginia, because people are looking at Virginia and saying, why is this model showing that's a little bit closer and the chances of winning aren't as good compared to the Wisconsin model? So let's take our best case scenario when it comes to Democrats in this situation. So we can see Democrats would get 55.6% of the vote in their best case scenario. But as I mentioned, we take both parties' best case scenarios. So the Democrats' worst case scenario is the Republicans' best case scenario. So if we look at the difference between 50%, the number you need to win, and 55.6, we see that above that 50% number, we're at 5.6%. Now, if we look at the Republican number, we see the Republican numbers at 3.5%. Now, what we do with those two numbers, we just add them together, and then we get 9.1%. To figure out what percentage the Democrats have as far as winning, we take their 5.6% that we talked about being over 50 just a second ago, and we simply divide that by 9.1. This gives us our 61% likelihood for the Democrats to win. And if we want to figure out the Republican number, we just simply take the number 1 and minus 61. So we're going to go ahead and get into some of the partisan models in a future video, but I wanted to show you this one with the average models because these are not based off of partisan registration, to give you an idea of why when I say somebody has a 100% chance of winning, why that is. It's because both their worst and best case scenarios are over 50% in the model. Once that worst case scenario starts dropping below 50%, then you're going to see that. And in the case of Virginia, what we actually have higher standard deviations, which causes for a lot of fluctuation in the vote. Okay, so the Youngkin election, for example, for governor, kind of influences that a little bit more. So this is possibly one of the reasons. But still, the numbers look good as far as the Democrats in Virginia. So, be happy with that. They are good. Don't worry, they're not as bad as we think. So thank you all very much for joining me. I hope you had a wonderful time in this video. Please remember to subscribe and like the video. Comment down below if you have any questions. I will see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day wherever it is you are. Bye-bye.